So good evening, everyone. We are here tonight, as always. On Fridays, from next week, we're gonna meet every Wednesday. So we're gonna announce it everywhere on our social media. So tonight is our last Friday night lecture, and we are here today, as usual, not only to hear something new and to reflect on something, but also to raise funds for Helping to Live, an evacuation initiative that was founded in Tbilisi and is helping and supporting people since February, since this stage of the war started. So please feel free before the lecture or leaving the lecture to leave some coins on the table in our donation basket. We would really, really appreciate it. So tonight's speaker is Nini Palavandishvili. She's a writer, curator, and researcher of mid-century architecture and art. And today we're gonna speak about the language, but the language of mosaics, which was massively affected by the local, sometimes mythology, sometimes context, and was sometimes twisted, those narratives that were put upon by the central, for example, governments and powers, they were twisted or reevaluated due to the local context and local narratives. So reading the mosaics in different part of the so-called former Soviet Union space gives us a lot of new information and open up a new level, a new layer of understanding how people were evaluating what they were receiving from the state back then. So I'm gonna give the floor to Nini right now. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. Well, hello. I'm very glad to see you all here. As Polina said, I've chosen to speak about Soviet period mosaics today. I have been researching on this topic for almost 6 to 8 years now. Initially, it was just a hobby, let's say. So I had some favorite ones which were spread in different parts of Georgia, and I was like regularly visiting them and documenting them, and then my collection grew more and more. And then I realized that I have quite immense collection of mosaics all over Georgia. And then I started creating first a map to put them all, because after some years I would not really remember where they were. And at some point I realized, or I felt this need that I also needed to spread the word, so that it was not only my collection, that I needed to also raise awareness about those mosaics, because as time was passing by, they were gradually, the condition was getting worse, or they were destroyed or just damaged. And well, I definitely wanted to save some of the most precious ones. And the first argument, whenever I would come up with talking to people and saying, oh, there is this beautiful mosaic there or there, and it's in such a bad condition, and there was always like the first reaction was, oh, but come on, this is so Soviet, we don't need that much. And there is this wrong assumption all over Georgia or in other Soviet republics, that when talking about 20th century mosaics, that they were always only popular in Soviet Union. But this is definitely a wrong assumption, because mosaics were popular in all the countries. I mean, we talk today and we talk now about 20th century mosaics because for those who don't know, mosaic art is very ancient, so there is a history of antique mosaics, of Roman mosaics, of Byzantine mosaics, but what we talk today about the 20th century mosaic is very different in its style and iconography. The technique is still the same, but the iconography and the context of creating them is very different. So, and as I said, like about the wrong assumption that mosaics were only in Soviet Union or socialist countries, there are many, many different examples all over Europe or US. For example, this one is in Portugal, that one as well. This is Spain, very famous one by Joan Miró. This is also Barcelona. This is also Spain. This is US, also very famous one, created by Marc Chagall. And this is in Mexico. So we definitely should forget forever that mosaics were created only in socialist countries. So we have them all over. Though it might be true that the popularization of mosaic art was much more intensive in socialist countries, because in 1918, Lenin initiated the monumental propaganda plan that proposed employing visual monumental art as an important means for publicizing revolutionary and communist ideas. But it was concerning mostly banners and slogans on the buildings, and also sculptures of great revolutionary or communist leaders, as also this image shows. And wider popularization of monumental art in the Soviet republics was possible only in Brezhnev era, so much, much later, starting from 60s on, because previous to Brezhnev there was very important decree issued by Khrushchev in 1955, where he forbid all unnecessary decorations on the buildings. It was concerning any reliefs, any ornaments, any mosaic, and so on. And it has the reason because after the Second World War, and especially after Stalin, when he wanted to manifest the win of Soviet Union in the Second World War, and he was building like very impressive, big in scale buildings. So when Khrushchev came to power, so he basically put all his focus on building residential houses. And those had to be built very fast and in very cheap way. So he's also this decree on elimination of all the unnecessary decorations, all the buildings. It had very practical reasons, just to save costs and build very fast. In Georgia, the birth of Soviet period mosaics starts in mid-60s, and as a birthplace we can consider Bichunta, which is in a breakaway region of Abkhazia currently. It's a seaside, very important resort for back then. It was all Union important resort, where Zurab Tsereteli, artist born in Georgia but who made his fortune and who became very famous mainly in Russia. So he was invited and he started created and it was a huge commission. So I don't know if any of you has ever seen the territory of Bichunta holiday resort, but these are 5 or 6 huge 16-floor high-rise sanatorias and all different complexes. And in the decoration of the whole territory, the commission was given to Zurab Tsereteli. So you can imagine of what scale we talk. And he also gave freedom to his imagination and expression. and so on. So this is kind of considered as the birth of mosaic art in Georgia. But Tsereteli was surely not the only mosaic artist in Georgia, though broadly in in colloquial, or like when you ask around, so for example you see a mosaic in a city and you ask whose mosaic it could have been, like the first answer would be Tsereteli, even though that is not true at all. Tsereteli maybe did 10% of the mosaics which are all over Georgia, but he was definitely not the only one and not the best one also. These are some examples from Bicuinta. And it's very interesting. I will also come back to Tsereteli later, but for an artist who was so famous, so popular, so favored in Soviet Union, where the socialism, realism was prevailing, Tsereteli, none of his works, at least in mosaics, is depicting motifs of socialist realism. Most of his motifs are very abstract. They are very much loaded with nature and animals and like more fairy tale scenarios and so on. So already here we can see that the obligation to have like the socialist realism or laborers or social class building the country, at least in peripheral Republic of Georgia, the artists were not following it so strictly. And I will show now more and more examples of this. So first I wanted to show a little bit of typology. So most of the mosaics, or the majority of the mosaics on the buildings, they indicate and stress the function of the building. So in this case, this is the central bus station in Tbilisi, and you also see like this very decorative, almost monochrome image, which takes its inspiration for this like very interesting like all-day vehicles depiction. And it's also interesting that for a building which is this highly modernist building from 70s, the artists choose something older. So this combination of retro and high modernism. This next one is an Institute of Machine Engineering, and you also see like this kind of heavy machinery, but in very decorative, in very graphical also what's the word in English? Execution. This one is the former building of Ministry of Forestry. And you also see it's a huge panel in the whole length of the building. Unfortunately, we have like small projection, but you can imagine like how it's almost 10 floors high, and this whole panel depicts all possible hunting scenes and forest and animals and nature, and like very beautifully decorated one. This one is on the fire station, and again, like the images, the compositions show very directly the function of the building. So it's kind of, for today's understanding or current understanding, they served as the advertising also for the building, or giving like the inscription of the building. So when looking at them, you knew exactly what type of function this or that building had. So this one is obviously for sport and athletics and so on. And one of my favorites in Tsuaricamia, it's a former culture house or club or theater. Very, very beautiful one It's also a very complex one. It's not flat. It's almost like three-dimensional and so it's more gorelief. So it means like it gets almost sculptural. And of course, dedicated to Second World War. This one, also one of my favorites. This is in Tbilisi. You maybe have passed it several times. This is on a former swimming pool. And here for me it's also very interesting that I already talked, right, that in Soviet Union, like most of the artists, they had to work in the socialist realism style, but in monumental art, artists managed to escape this and get quite abstract in their compositions. So also in this one, of course, I mean, you would guess that it's about swimming and water, but you have no realistic images of such. And it's also interesting. So these are the first sketches for this mosaic panel, and you can see how the artist develops his ideas, and from like concrete, like real figures of swimmers, he comes to this very abstract image. And it's also a very beautiful one. And when we come in the end of the lecture about the preservation, this one is definitely one we have to fight for, because the swimming pool itself, it's abandoned for almost 10 years now. So you can imagine its condition is getting worse and worse. But it's also in private property, so the chances to save the building and the mosaic with it, I don't know. I'm not very optimistic, though it would be very, very sad to save this one. And of course, like this, and it's also, it's on the one hand, it's of course stresses the function of the building, but it also serves as an independent decorative artworks which give focus to the facade and structures it. So if there is a possibility of covering like big masses of the building with these monumental artworks, artists quite successfully used this opportunity and decorated them, which of course gave another layer to the to make them outstanding in the city, and not to make all the buildings looking like similar to each other. Also this one in Borjomi, it's the whole facade, very nice one. And very interesting topic is the iconography of the mosaics. In most of the cases, I mean, as we said, like 20th century mosaics are not only associated with Soviet Union, but primarily with the regime, and considered to be that they were serving as a propaganda tool. It is true that artists working on mosaic art often were depicting representatives of different professions, mostly laborers who were contributing to building socialism. And one of the most beloved topics were also cosmonauts. Also logical, as Soviet Union wanted to manifest its achievement in this field. And you know, like in 70s, Yuri Gagarin was the first man who flew in cosmos, and it was the huge achievement also for the Cold War, like for the superiority of Soviet Union against US. But mosaics from Soviet period Georgia hardly depict direct communist symbols such as hammer and sickle or inscription of USSR, and it's not that I particularly choose those which don't depict them, but it's really, really hard to find those all over Georgia. Of course, there are maybe 1, 2, maybe max 10 of such, but also from what I have seen from Ukraine or from Central Asia, we have proportionally very, very few of such. And mosaics in Georgia, they are rather full of national motifs and references to local fables, national costumes, people dressed in national costumes, and particular regions of Georgia, and so on. The first example in this category I show is one of the earliest examples of this period mosaic art in Georgia, and it was done for a Georgian pavilion for All Union Fair in Moscow. And it's interesting that the work was not produced on site but was transported from Georgia, assembled then on site, and then after the expo it was brought again back to Georgia. So we definitely don't know the reason for this, but it's quite a strange scenario for it, that it did not stay there, or that, so you should also imagine this one is approximately, I would say 5 to 8, so 5 in height and 8 meter in length. So it's a huge one, and it's also a very heavy one. It is in the family. It's by Vachtan Kokiashvili, and it's kept in the family, in the yard. They have luckily a private house with the yard, and it's kept there. So there were also some negotiations with the municipality to put it somewhere in a public space, but unfortunately our municipality did not succeed in, I don't know, in negotiating or. Yeah, but luckily it's very well preserved and kept, yeah. And why I choose that one, that for those who are a little bit familiar with art history, so there is direct reference to what I show on left is the very famous fresco by Giotto, Kiss of Judas. And it's from 14th century, so like almost flat arrangement of compositions and the torches and facial features. Unfortunately, I mean, the image is now very small, but they clearly resemble Giotto's work, very skillfully translated into mosaic art. And given also like these very national features of Hefsuretian traditional dresses and all the accessories and so on. Again, coming to Tsereteli, and much larger in scale composition, which is adorning the former trade union cultural house in Tbilisi. So there is a very similar one which is in Mexico, and also covering library building, the central library building in Mexico. And the impact of Mexican muralism on monumental art in the Soviet Union is not surprising. Like members of Los Tres Grandes, that was the name of 3 very, very famous artists who were in particular working in mosaic art in Mexico, and their representatives developed tight bonds with the Soviet Union. Some of them like traveled several times to the Soviet Union and participated in official meetings, congresses, and so on. And Tsereteli was very good friends with them. And it's no surprise that he was familiar with the works of Mexican artists. So here, also here in this artist, you see him standing in front of one of his works. So Tsereteli is the one on the left, and in the middle is David Alfaro Siqueiros, who is one of the main representatives of this Mexican muralism art. And while talking about Tsereteli, I wanted to show this image which shows like the scale of his production. So Tsereteli was actually the only artist who had back then, his kind of workshop in the understanding. So today it's no surprise or not an exception when we talk, for example, about artists like Olafur Eliasson or like some very important artists. So they have their workshops where lots of people work for them. So they basically give their name to the work, but the whole work is done by apprentices and their students. And this was also the case with Tsereteli in 80s. And he was also the one who founded the Faculty of Monumental Art in the Academy of Arts in Tbilisi, but that already in 80s. So mosaic art was started much before, but in 80s he started this faculty, which was also very, very popular. And we also have to say here and admit, while we talk about Tsereteli and this whole system of mosaic production, that mosaics were also good means of money making. To produce 1 square meter of mosaic costed approximately 30 rubles. So you can imagine like the scale of the mosaics and the facades of the building. So they are from 100 to more than 100 square meters. So you can imagine how much money artists would make on one of these kind of commission. But we also have to say that not all the artists were doing these commissions just for money reasons. There are also very beautiful, very qualitative, very skillfully done works which we have as a heritage from that period. And the next example is one of this kind, which I love very, very much. It is a decorative wall on the facade of a former furniture factory. Unfortunately, we don't know the artist's name. This is also something with the monumental art, that artists would never write their names on the monumental art. And today, after almost 40 years, 50 years, sometimes even 60 years, meanwhile, these artists, they don't live anymore, or they are very, very old, or in some cases they would produce the sketches, but the work was done by somebody else. And also that the Union of Artists and the like the workshops where all these were produced, they don't exist anymore, and hence the archives also don't exist anymore. So to trace back the artists, in some cases it's almost impossible. Like in some cases I was lucky, and I would say I could find 70 to 80% of all the artists, or for all the mosaics which I have documented, also the artists, but of course there are some mosaics for which we don't know the artists. On the one hand, this mosaic has very typical depiction of progress, of technology, and laborers, and cosmonauts, and comets, and so on. But what caught my attention is the image of this female astronaut, which you see beneath the tree. It should not be that surprising in the era when Valentina Tereshkova, also the first and youngest woman in space, flew also a solo mission in 1963. But from what I have registered in Georgia, we have only 2 depictions of female astronauts. And what is particularly interesting about this one is that it in detail copies the features of Queen or King Tamar from a 12th century fresco. So for those who don't know, maybe that I have to mention that Queen Tamar was one of the most important rulers in Georgia's history. So no surprise that the unknown artist chose her as a model for a strong Soviet woman. So it's, for me, I don't know, like it's very, very interesting translation of a fresco into mosaic art, and very skillful also in all this graphic execution with all the features. The second image of a female astronaut, again by unknown artists in very, very bad condition. But here the connection is rather strange. So this image is of Anna Fisher, who is famous to be the first mother in space. But she has never been really so famous in Soviet reality. And this image of hers apparently appeared on the cover of Life magazine in 1985. And to my knowledge, Life magazine was also never really spread in Soviet Union. But we also have to consider that 1985 is already time when perestroika starts, and all the ties are loosened, so there is more freedom. So probably the artist who worked on that mosaic, he had some access to international press and saw that image, because otherwise I cannot really explain how this similarity could happen. Another very fascinating image is on the fire station in Tbilisi, and it's kind of a Hollywood movie final scene, like kind of the Armageddon scene, where main hero defeating the evil and standing as a conqueror on a backdrop of the city. And for Tbilisi historiographers, this image is interesting as it shows different layers and epochs of Tbilisi architecture. Like for those who know Tbilisi, one can really locate each building which is behind the firemen. But in iconography context, it is interesting insofar that the firefighter's figure is inspired by Saint Florian. And Saint Florian is the patron saint of firefighters, who is particularly popular in Austria and in southern Germany. And most representations of Saint Florian depict him dressed as a Roman soldier or a medieval knight holding a sword in one hand and a pitcher in one hand, with a burning building and pouring the water over the building, like it could be a church or any other type of building. But what's interesting that Saint Florian has no analog in Georgian register of saints. So again, how this similarity or knowledge came to the artist is very interesting, but I definitely doubt that this resemblance is random. The next one is a decorative wall in Khashuri. Nothing really special in particular about this mosaic, but it takes its inspiration from very famous Georgian artist Lado Gudiashvili. So again, like the way of standing and the poses, and also holding this plate with fruits on the head and so on. So the inspiration comes from this famous artist. And the last example in this category is the large-scale composition dedicated to the Treaty of Georgievsk. This is the huge viewing platform on the way to Stepantsminda, between Gudauri and Stepantsminda. Maybe some of you have seen it, where the central figure is mother with a child. And I think it's obvious that the inspiration comes from the image of Virgin Mary with child Jesus. So just to compare it again, so in the central figure is this mother with the child, with no specific features in this case, because it is also dedicated to Russia and Georgian friendship. So the features are rather mixed. So she with rather dark hair, the boy with blonde hair. So, but it's obvious that the iconography comes from Virgin Mary figure in the center, and the whole story develops around her. And of course, like lots of images from local fables. This one, for example, is Rustaveli's Knight in a Panther's Skin. This one is in a library, which is Prometheus or Amirani for Georgian context. And some local important figures. In this case, it's Sulkhan Saba Orbeliani, very famous writer and philosopher. Yeah, and shortly I will go through this. Of course, one of the most important category is industrial buildings. And in this case, as what we talked from the very beginning, like they indicate the function of the building. I mean, but not only the function, but what kind of industry was behind these factories or manufacturers and so on, like this shoe factory, alcohol factory, tea factory, and I would say this category is where the most, where we can say the most of this propaganda scheme of Soviet Union was working. Like, of course, there are lots of laborers, there is lots of achievement in agriculture and so on, and science and and technology, and we have like really huge number of such buildings. But again, the threat with them is that after fall of the Soviet Union in 90s, basically 95% of all the industry, it stopped to function. So all these buildings, they were at certain point abandoned. Some of them which were lucky, but of course not that lucky, they were privatized. So it means also that the function of the building was changed, that the new owners did not really care about the appearance or the decorative art and monumental art which was on the building. So they are quite under threat, and many of them are already also gone. But among them we have also very beautiful ones. This is the wall on a former house of domestic supplies. It's a huge it develops like a film shots, like many different like some details from them. Like if you look closely, they are very beautifully, skillfully done compositions and executed also very beautifully. And very special topic, one of my favorite topics also is, and very specific to Georgian context, are bus stops and small architectural forms. And I want to make the short overview of the scene shell pavilions, which definitely deserve to be mentioned particularly. The scene shell pavilions created in 70s in Georgia by architect Georgi Chachava in collaboration with Zurab Jalagania, an artistic collective comprising of 3 artists, Nodar Malazonia, Zurab Kapanadze, and Zurab Lejava. And they are fully functional sculptures serving as bus pavilions or like waiting pavilions. And those artworks indicate the engineering and artistic mastery of their authors and really prove the high quality of those mosaics. Moreover, that none of them repeats the shape or composition of another. There has been a lot written about, or rather photographically documented, bus stop architecture all over former Soviet Union, and there are several publications published in recent years, but those scattered along the Black Sea coast, also partly in breakaway region of Abkhazia. Very few still, like in Georgia's remaining territory. And in each individual case, these pavilions and their authors were innovators considering both form and technology of using the material, and also the shape and the drawing of them, they never repeat. And even though all of them have names such as elephant, shell, cat, octopus, and so on, their forms are rather very abstract and biomorphic. And based on the interview with one of the co-workers of Georgi Chachava, he said that when after his trip to Italy, Chachava was so much impressed by Nervi's architecture. Pierluigi Nervi was very famous structural engineer. And he was so much impressed by the architecture and technology developed by Nervi that he wanted to create something similar in Georgia, and to create some unusual architecture also here. And he definitely succeeded with this in these Bas pavilions. To my knowledge, I don't know if there are something similar in any other Soviet republics. I'm in touch with quite many colleagues from post-Soviet countries, but I have not seen something similar somewhere else. Those pavilions, you see they are rather modest in size and also in their color palette. Most of them are in 2 colors or maximum in 3 colors, and the accent is on their shape and graphic composition, and placed on the backdrop of the sea and sun. They stand out with their witty forms and playful forms, and we should also mention that the mosaics, in most of the cases, mosaics are done with smalty stones. And smalty is a tinted glass or pigmented glass, which is burned on very, very high degree. And smalty is very robust material. And since it's a glass, like on with the sun rays, directly falling on them, they sparkle very, very beautifully. So imagine like in the sunshine and on the backdrop of the sea, these amazing creatures and forms, they were really fascinating and eye-catching. Also, most of these pavilions have lost their function and they are abandoned. And it would be a real shame to keep neglecting them and lose them, as weather and time will definitely do their job, and we will lose those beautiful examples. Maybe one of the last examples in this category is the Café Fantasia, or so-called Octopus in Batumi. Which, in its scale, it exceeds all these bus stops. It's also by the same architect and artist collective, but it's also distinguished by its complexity. So it's an octopus that is surrounded by sea creatures. So you see like seahorses and dolphins and seashells and other creatures sitting on this octopus. So it's a very complex figure by its form and drawing, which attracts attention right away, but at the same time it's absolutely in harmony with its environment. It's outstanding not only visually and functionally, but it's also, there was this technological innovation back then. In 80s, there was the water distributing system installed in the architecture. So you could imagine, so what we have currently in many restaurants, what we call like sprinklers in hot days when the water splashes on us in hot days. So this kind of system was back then installed already in this structure. So in hot days, the water would sprinkle, and again, you can imagine like in the sunshine with this water and on a sea backdrop. So it was a very, very beautiful composition. But again, since late 90s, the octopus was abandoned and its condition gradually worsened, and there were several unsuccessful attempts to list it as an immovable cultural monument, but we never really succeeded. And the turning point became in 2014, when there was a threat of demolishing it. And then the biggest part of Batumi population got together, and also support from the whole Georgia, and we all managed to rescue it from demolition. And as a response to it, in 2017, Batumi municipality finally decided to start renovation works on the structure. And it was financed by a private fund, and the commission was given to a construction company who had very, let's say, very limited experience in restoring the mosaics. Even though there were promises that the original smalty stones would be kept and again reused, and there will be no changes on the structures, unfortunately the reality appeared different. And after 3 years of being under treatment, the octopus showed its new face with altered appearance, so original forms and design was distorted. Totally new smalty stones were used, and they are different from original size, and also in color they are different. And as a kind of cherry on top, in 2020 the new octopus proved to be worth to be listed as a cultural monument. So actually what they have listed as a cultural monument is absolutely a new work. So it's not the work which was created in 1980s. It's not the work by original artists, but absolutely new octopus with similarity to the original one. And it definitely stands out as a monument to how the restoration work should not be done. But I mean, we have in a way lost this one, lost the original one, and maybe we can draw some lesson from this example. And since I talked about the preservation, I also want to show you very few examples of mosaics which are either gone or damaged. So this was a beautiful wall on former Lumen haberdashery factory in Khashuri. Very beautiful composition. And so these are the details. Like gradually I was documenting it for several years, and you can see at some point some people from neighboring church were also coming and stealing the tesseras, or like the stones, and at some point the new owners decided that they had to cut the new entrance exactly in the wall where the mosaics were. So they could not find any other place for entering the territory, even though it has an official entrance. So yeah. And this one as well, the new owners decided to cut the wall, the door right into the mosaic. This is the original. And I just put these some examples how in different countries the artworks from different periods, like, and let's say from sympathized periods, they are treated. So for example, this is an artwork from Nazi period Austria, and what a contemporary artist did in 2002, that she only removed the swastika from the image, and she put this glass layer in front and wrote idyll or ideal with mirrored. So it also questions, so is it so idyllic or not? So this is kind of like recontextualizing it. So it's so the way she found it's not just putting down and erasing the history, but questioning it also. This is maybe, you know, the monument of the Soviet army in Sofia, which has been, it's also funny meanwhile that this image is from 2014, so when the first conflict with Russia and Ukraine happened, so it was immediately painted in these two colors, and then have been different other attempts from street artists painting it either in Superman costume or some others. So it's also way of contextualizing or questioning the history and find new ways of dealing with the former Soviet legacy. And it also can serve as an inspiration for contemporary artists. So this one, for example, it's very also famous Georgian artist who works on the enamel jewelry. And so the inspiration is also from one of the mosaics which we have in Tbilisi. So I guess that's all. It was a long introduction and overview of many examples. Thank you very much. Hope it was not too long, and I'm very, very happy to answer your questions and have discussion. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nini. So first, I think we can hear some questions from the audience. I hope there are some. Or I can start, or yes, please.
A more pragmatical question is your map of these available to the public by any chance?
The map is available. It is also, I sent you the map, right? So it's also linked in the event. So yeah, it's public.
Lovely.
You can use, there are all the locations.
And another question I would have is, what do you think these mosaics meant to the average Georgian/Soviet citizen in their everyday life? Like, would they serve more of a practical function as for orienteering, or a more aesthetic, or a mixture, or how do you see this?
I think it was a mixture of all. So at a certain point, there were in such abundance in all over Georgia, these mosaics, that they became like really part of their daily life. So they were seeing these mosaics or other monumental art like on everyday basis, and you can imagine wherever they would go. In their working places, be it like, I don't know, libraries, like cultural institutions or industrial buildings we saw, or any other. So I would say 60 to 70% of all the institutions and buildings, they were decorated with some monumental art. Not necessarily mosaics. There could have been like large-scale paintings or like gobelins or some other type of work. So they were absolutely becoming part of their life. And also some of them, like for example, these two mosaics I showed from Zurab Tsereteli, they had also very kind of funny names in everyday usage, like in colloquial, you know, like one of them was called Seroja's Dream. So they were in a way so abstract and so not absurd, but in good way absurd, you know, like with this not realistic animals coming from fairy tales that people called it like Seroja's Dream. So, but it was not like the in a way derogatory. So it was like more with love, you know, so yeah. But it's also like currently, I also realized that when I started looking for the mosaics, like intentionally, when I was traveling and looking around and asking, like going to some village and asking if there was any mosaic, people would say, no, we don't have. And then I would turn the next corner, I would discover them. So it's so much already part of their life that they don't recognize them anymore, or I don't know what's the phenomena. Yeah.
Well, we are recording, that's why I need you. Yeah, here.
Just short question. Is a jewelry designer name you mentioned Palavandishvili, or it's somebody else?
Yeah, that's her. That's her. Yes.
And are there any other modern artists and designers who work with mosaic?
Particularly with mosaic, or like taking inspiration from mosaic art? Okay, I have to think. I'm pretty sure there are some. I mean, this one was obvious. I have to think, but I'm pretty sure there are some who take inspiration from this art. Okay, I don't have any now concrete examples.
First of all, thank you so much for your talk. I find it really interesting. I didn't know much about Soviet mosaics beforehand. And I was just interested to see, you talked at the end a bit about preservation and restoration. And in your opinion, what would you...
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so in your opinion, what would you like to see in the future of restoration and preserving these mosaics, and what do you think would be the most appropriate way to go forward with them?
Well, it's very complex and very difficult, of course, because I mean, you saw now maybe 5% of all the mosaics which are still existent in Georgia. So there is a huge number, and many of them are in quite bad shape meanwhile. So what I would wish for sure is, on the one hand, that the like broadly, there is much more awareness, that also people would understand that they are not necessarily something associated directly with Soviet system, but also they are beautiful artworks. That from the government side, there are much more regulations how to preserve them, and also in case of private, like selling those buildings to private owners, that there are strict regulations how to deal with the existing monumental artworks on them. Then there should be proper documentation done on all these mosaics with proper measurements and the materials and so on. There should be a catalog with all this information available, and I guess we should, that after this, there should be done a selection what is absolutely necessary to be saved, be from art historical, artistic, architectural, functional, social, whatever perspective, because there are many categories where they apply or which apply to them. And then we should start, or like this should go parallel, because we cannot also wait too long because we are losing them. And there should be also quite urgently, we should start educating restorers for the mosaics, because from the old generation we are also losing them. There are not many left, maybe really like literally 2 or 3 who really know how to work with 20th century mosaics. And there is also this, I was just last week on very big international conference on mosaic preservation, and it's also that we don't talk about restoring mosaics anymore. We talk about conserving. So we should not restore but conserve them the way they are. And if there is a need of reinterpretation, like for example also that one with Treaty of Georgievsk and with the monuments dedicated particularly to, I don't know, like Soviet, some very special dates in Soviet history, then we can work on their reinterpretation, like being, be it a board where the history is written or with some other means. But demolishing, destroying them, it's definitely not the way we should treat them. That was a long answer.
I was wondering about the Mexican mosaic mural influence and whether there was a long tradition in Mexico of such art, and yeah, which ones, who came first, the Soviet or Mexican mosaic murals?
Mexicans were first, for sure. They started much earlier, but I mean not way too much earlier. Like maybe they started in 50s and we like in Soviet Georgia. I mean there are examples of mosaics in Soviet period beyond Georgia also which are done in 50s already. But since I just talked about mosaics in Georgia, like the earliest we have, they are from mid-60s. Yeah.
I have a question in relation to the Soviet architecture. As we say in Georgian Soviet architecture that these monuments from that period were international by form and national with meaning. Mm-hmm. Would you say that also in mosaics this like identity of like national identity was that strong as in architecture? Because like we saw some different examples that like some of them are pure functional, like reflecting the function of the building, and some of them are fictional or mythical. And we saw the example of Tamar, King Tamar, but was it like really strong, this identity and the will of expression, this nationalism, or not that much?
I think it was definitely, and these images also show it. So like from region to region, you can definitely see that the artists, they were like that the figures in the mosaics, they are in national costumes. That also the, if it's agriculture, then you know, like in West Georgia, especially in Guria and in Ajara, you would have lots of citruses and tea picking motifs, whereas in Kakheti, everywhere is wine. And with wine, it's very interesting that it's also you know, in iconography, wine is symbol of Saint Mary. So it was also like this twofold thing, even though church was, or religious was forbidden in Soviet period, but culturally, like those churches were cultural monuments. And all the frescoes, and you are much younger, but still in Soviet time, we would go to churches and see them as a sightseeing cultural monuments. So in this way also like this ambiguity, you know, like of also Saint Mary, the wine, the national symbol, or the church symbol, I mean they are very twined in this way. But I would definitely say that in monumental art and in mosaics, they were much more national. in their content and in their message than the architecture.
And also one thing, if it was like these decisions were top-down decisions, what to represent in the mosaics, or the artists were the ones who decided this image?
I think the majority, they were quite free in their decisions, and it was not like this pyramidal system like from the center. So because I see it also in other regions, also in Central Asia, there are lots of national motifs, and it was probably also, they wanted with this for people to have something to identify with, and not something totally distant for them. Yeah.
I think
there was
we
a question there?
Yeah, another question. Yeah. Would you please come closer a little bit?
So, to my knowledge, when Soviets came to Georgia, they whitened the churches from inside, destroying many frescoes. Were mosaics in churches treated any differently?
Not all of the frescoes were whitened. Of course, there were some which were whitened, but we still have lots of frescoes, luckily for us, which were not whitened. So, yeah, I don't know exactly what was their selection. So why would they whiten some and leave the others? But we definitely have quite many good examples, and from different periods as well. We have frescoes from 12th century, like paintings, I mean, also, as well as mosaics. We have mosaics also from 7th century. We have, yeah, so I really don't know what was their program of how were they proceeding with it.
And I have also one question. I think connected to the questions that already was asked. As some of us know, Architecture Biennale just finished in Tbilisi. A big, very important, very interesting event. And one of the discussions of film screenings even dedicated to the so-called Soviet brutalism architecture. There was a question from two people, the similar one, from Uzbekistan and from Latvia, who are witnessing also a poor support and just of architectural value and devaluation of architectural value of those buildings in respectful countries. They were asking panelists what should be the approach, because they cannot really call the government to keep an eye on that architecture, as it would be taken as a political statement by the government, what neither Latvia nor Uzbekistan cannot afford. Private entities or private sponsors could not do this in time or don't want to do it, for example. So who is responsible for calling for action, and who we should call for action from your perspective as a person who is researching it for so many years? I'm not requesting any recipe, obviously, but what's your vision for upcoming 10, 15 years for Georgia, for example?
Yeah, very painful question. Very. Because tomorrow I'm also asked to speak publicly on the TV on one of the buildings, which is also now under threat of demolition. I mean, not yet demolition, but it's privatized now. It's the TV broadcasting building. And first of all, I would say it's to speak as much as possible about this building and to explain the value of these buildings. So why are they important? Why are they to be kept, why are they cultural heritage, and so on. With whatever means, I mean, be it on a TV or lectures of this kind or architectural biennial. I mean, that's a super initiative which happened now for the third time. Every year it gathers quite big audience and much, much bigger from year to year. Then there is this, there are two very nice exhibitions about this period architecture running currently. And I'm very, very happy that there are so many people every day coming and visiting, and especially young generation. I mean, we should use like all possible means, you know, like talks, publishing, exhibitions, whatever, but we are unfortunately still very slow in our actions, because the private owners, they are much faster. They are demolishing also them. And also it's that, especially in Georgia, 60 years have passed without doing any maintenance work on these structures. And since it's reinforced concrete, and concrete gets what's the word? I mean, it gets porous, or I mean, so it not really hollow, but I mean, they really need maintenance work, so not to get completely demolished. And of course, try to talk with the investors and the new owners. So whenever there is this case that the building is bought by a new investor, one should try to negotiate that they keep it. And with several good examples, maybe we can already I always say also for this example with the TV, I say that it should become for the new owner prestigious to save them. So it should not be like the burden on them and like obligation, but it should become prestigious for them. They should also understand that they are doing something good for the country, for the people, for their own business, I don't know. So yeah, and we have like very, very few good examples of this maybe, like with the Bank of Georgia, which is this very famous building by Georgi Chachava, by the way, the same architect who did the bus pavilions. We have like Temuri Ugulava, who is doing all this, I mean, of course, with the change of function to the buildings, but at least he is not demolishing them totally. We have, what do we have? We have Palace of Rituals, which has a private owner, and unfortunately it's not accessible really, but at least they maintain the building. Yeah, with few good examples, and also with international examples. I mean, there are several very good international examples, but this problem is not only also of post-socialist countries. There is also this huge problem in France, in US, in Japan. Yeah, there are always opponents and proponents for this type of building. Some consider them ugly and some consider them really valuable.
Thank you so much. I think one of the most important reasons that you mentioned is this dialogue between owners and specialists, and this reputation layer in it, right? So it's good for your reputation to save architecture, whatever connotation and political or historical connotation it has.
Yeah.
Because it's a symbol of some time that we as a society lived through, right?
Yeah, and it's also the problem is with the 20th century legacy, be it architecture or mosaics, that the time which has passed from the fall of the Soviet Union, it's still very short. So just to understand the value of them, it's still very short. So I'm pretty sure after 50 years, we will start to cherish this architecture, and we will understand why this architecture or mosaics or all the monumental art is valuable and important. But we have to start acting now, because in 50 years half of them will be gone.
So thank you very much. Hopefully we're gonna start doing something earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nini.
Thank you very much for staying so long.
All the links and also links to the two exhibitions that Nini mentioned will be posted on our social media so that you can dig deeper a little bit and to see more. Yeah, from next week, as I already announced, we are meeting every Wednesday, so see you on Wednesday hopefully, and please feel free to leave some donations on our donation table for the evacuation project Helping to Live. We appreciate it enormously. Thank you very much. Have a good Friday evening.